welcome you and thank you for coming on behalf of the Drescher Center for the Humanities and the Inclusion Imperative Program. I am delighted today to be able to introduce for you Antonia Liguori, who is a lecturer in applied storytelling at Loughborough University in the UK and an AHRC research fellow at the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. And we thank the Smithsonian for partnering with us and allowing her to be here today. She has a PhD in history and computer science from Bologna, Italy, and a master's in contemporary history from La Sapienza, Italy. She's also a journalist and a web content and SEO manager. So for all of those of you among you who think that you need to just focus on one thing.
Yeah.
In the last 7 years, she's been working across Europe to explore the role of storytelling in contemporary society. She's been involved in a variety of international research projects to develop tools and methods to foster innovation in education, to explore the role of storytelling in today's digital world, to investigate and trial ways of using digital storytelling as a participatory methodology for interdisciplinary research. She coordinated the Multimedia department at BAICR Sistema Cultura, a consortium of 5 renowned Italian cultural institutes, with the aim of contributing to the enhancement of cultural heritage through innovative methodologies and the creation of digital environments. In November 2014, she joined Loughborough University School of the Arts, English and Drama as a research assistant to work on a project on drought risk and you, DRY. This was an interdisciplinary research project with the aim of developing an evidence-based resource for drought risk management in which scientific data and multiple narrative approaches are brought together to facilitate decision-making. And I think you'll hear more about that in a bit. Since then, she's taken her digital storytelling projects in several directions, often partnering with arts practitioners and scientists in her work with and in communities around the world. Her research has focused on 3 main strands: applied storytelling on environmental issues, digital storytelling in cultural heritage education, storytelling and urban design. More recently, she's also been exploring digital storytelling as therapeutic intervention. Her work is inspiring in the way it gathers people and their voices across geographical, cultural, and political divides, and shows how storytelling can help us understand our common lives and imagine our common futures. Please join me in welcoming Antonia Liguori.
So thank you very much for, of course, to the Smithsonian Institution for bringing me here from the UK and to the Drescher Center for this great opportunity to meet you all tonight. So when I heard that you were going to record my talk, I thought maybe I should read, but then that was against my nature. So, and then I thought, yeah, if I'm reading it's too artificial and then my exotic accent is not so effective, so maybe better to interact in a more human-driven way. That is also the way I do my research anyway. So what I'm going to do today is just sharing with you in a very informal and I hope interesting and let's say engaging way just one example, but then trying to reflect on a specific example of ways in which we had to absolutely dismantle the idea we had at the beginning of a research project to then complete the project in a very different and unexpected but very exciting way. So Jessica was mentioning this project around drought and water scarcity. And what we are going to explore today is how we started and what we completed to then reflect on how digital storytelling and different forms of storytelling can be applied and adapted throughout the research process. So this will be a very informal conversation. There is a structure. I mean, it's not informal because I didn't prepare. It's informal because feel free, please, to stop, ask. If there is anything that you don't like or you don't understand for any reason, please tell me. But we'll be quite interactive, and I try to embed some multimedia so that it's not too boring to listen to my voice all the time. The itinerary of the day is this. So I will start just sharing my personal journey. So I had such a strange kind of story. I mean, starting from the humanities with history and computer science. I was a journalist. I've been working in the heritage sector. And then I arrived to this digital storytelling world that Bill knows very well, and Bill's group here at UMBC. So, and we will see my way of being part of that group. That is a bit, again, different. I will explain why I decided to approach storytelling in a different way, and why I think it's important to leave space to experiment sometimes. Then the case study I want to share with you is this major project around drought that is called Dry Project. And this is the reason why I actually started my journey, because I had to move from Italy to the UK to join a research team in Loughborough University without knowing that drought was a possible problem in UK. As Italian, I thought the UK was the wettest country you could imagine, and without knowing that digital storytelling could be applied in different ways. So my experience on the Dry project is also something that can be shared maybe with younger researchers as a way of understanding how we can adapt our own, academic background to something that can bring us something that is enriching in terms of academic experience as well. And attached to the Dry project, there is a great experience we had called The Reasons, and I will talk about that. So it's like a follow-on project that is linked to that and was possible thanks to additional funding to work with the communities, and I will talk to you about this. And as part of the 2 case studies, we've been able to develop something that is quite interesting as a process, and you will see the outcome is a community song. And you will hear the song, and you will listen to the voices that has been embedded in this community song. And in the end, while we were preparing this visit, we had conversations with Jessica and Lindsay and the team, and we thought, okay, what can I bring here that can be useful? So it's not just, okay, I had this great experience in Dry project. I want to discuss with you and trigger some reflections and questions. So the presentation is ending with, let's say, some examples of ways in which storytelling has been reshaped and adapted by our community members throughout the research project, starting from the co-design of the research to the development and delivery of the research activity to the impact. So how we use storytelling to measure or to enhance the impact of our research. And I hope to share with you the aims of my research approach and why I'm using storytelling. So my journey started from history, contemporary history. And in particular, I had a specific interest in understanding micro-narratives, micro-histories, and social histories in a specific period in Italy between the 2 world wars, because at that time I was living in a city that was built during the fascism. So my interest was in understanding how we perceive the built environment, the place in which we live, and how individual stories can somehow shape the place attachment and of a community. And this brought me to then explore new tools to extract these stories, to collect stories, to somehow stimulate stories that sometimes are not relevant to the dominant narrative that we hear, that we read on the books, that we read on the news. So I wanted to trial a tool that enabled me to gather hidden stories and to simulate and amplify silent voices. So I found this tool that is called digital storytelling. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it's something that was developed in the San Francisco Bay by a group of creative people. Joe Lambert is one of the most recognized names so far, and we all know his incredible effort in developing a worldwide, let's say, culture of a digital storytelling approach that is nothing else than working with the communities to enable them and empower them to make their short piece of narrative. Like it's a 2-3 minutes video that is made in a social and collective environment. So, and they have a sort of structure that is usually in 5 or 7 steps, as they want to call, and it requires like different phases for the creation of the story, starting with the story circle, in which we start thinking to a story in an oral way, and we share the story as a draft, just orally within a group, and then we reshape, transform the story in a form of a script that usually is a short script of 250 words, and then this script is recorded in a voiceover, and then the participants are taught how to make a video, how to add a video. And usually the process ends with the screening of these videos. Okay, so this was my starting point, my way in the digital storytelling world. But I think the metaphor of my journey is quite clear in this picture that actually I took while I was flying to DC last time I came to work at the Smithsonian. That is like the ice melting in the sea, where I see, you know, the ice being the sort of orthodoxy, the practice, the conventions, you know. I'm not just referring to digital storytelling, I'm referring to conventions in general, to something, to models, to methods. And the sea, I see something that is more lively, something that is more blurred, something that is more, that is not static. And I think in this picture, I want to express my need to understand how we can reshape methodologies, depending on the context in which we have to do our research, especially if we approach research as action research, as participatory research, especially if we want to work with communities, and especially as I was moving to the UK to work in worldwide. We are working now in India with transgender communities. We are working in Colombia to explore environmental issues. We are working in Eastern Africa to explore air pollution and other kind of waste management issues, and how we can adapt the methodology in a way that is really effective and is not something that we want to deliver to the community. And so the journey of today, the journey that I'm sharing with you today, is this idea of adapting and transforming storytelling and combining storytelling and creating a new hybrid form of storytelling which embeds other forms of arts. And in particular, I'm talking about a collaboration with a songwriter to transform personal stories into a community song. This were, of course, we have to start exploring our research questions. And my main concern was to find, not only I'm talking first person, but of course this is a collective journey, and you will hear voices of people being part of this journey. We were reflecting on, you know, in this project around drought, climate change, how we could somehow engage with the community in a way that their individual stories could be then meaningful for the whole community. Because the main concern we had, the main aim we had, was to understand how to build a community that could be resilient. And by the time we were gathering and collecting individual stories, we understood that resilience is not something that we can build at the individual level. It's not something that can be built in isolation. It's something that has to be built within the community in a way that the community can embrace. And in a way was in contradiction to our methodology, because when we wrote, I was telling earlier, when we wrote the proposal, the research grant, we actually wrote, okay, we are going to work with the community to use storytelling as a way of merging lay knowledge, community knowledge with scientific knowledge. So we had scientists, hydrologists bringing their science, developing their hydrological modeling to explore the impact of climate change. And then we were going to ask people to make their nice stories around drought experiences in the UK or future scenarios of climate change impact through digital storytelling. But of course, this was challenging for a variety of reasons. The first reason why this was challenging has been shared by this man here, who was one of the first person I met while we were working in these 7 river catchments across the UK. So we had to go there, and built a community of local stakeholders to then identify the local water issues. And this is what he said.
Like everything else, no one is really interested unless it affects them personally. And of course, the pang is only seen by a few people.
Okay, so he's talking about this small river flowing in this small village and how difficult it was for him to understand why we should care about a small river within a village. And in a way, how personal views can be meaningful for the community. And this is why we started questioning how personal narratives could be somehow meaningful to our research process. In a way, it was challenging our own methodology.
Like everything else, no one is really interested unless it affects them personally.
Sorry. And just after this conversation then, we had within our team additional reflections on what kind of method we should apply then to invite the people to reflect on issues which are not too relevant. Of course, we had to deliver a research project. And of course, the lack of interest was an issue. And of course, the fact that we were going to gather personal stories was somehow replicating fragmentation rather than facilitating cohesion. And so the idea we had was to try and dismantle what we thought was an orthodoxy. And the orthodoxy I'm referring to was actually the so-called 5 steps process of the digital storytelling, traditional and conventional methodology. Because we thought that to be able to make something that could somehow stimulate people's reactions, we had to make something that was more impactful and it was somehow owned by the community we were working with. Another challenge we had was this idea of using stories to dismantle knowledge hierarchies. Within an interdisciplinary project, even within our team, we are the poor people. You know, we are the arts and humanities people trying to convince the scientists that the work we do is quite serious. So the challenge for us, so how we were perceived at the beginning of the process was that we were the ones giving them the tool to communicate the science better. Okay? So storytelling was a way of communicating the brilliant research we were going to do, which of course we weren't happy about. From our side, what we believed was that we were going to produce new data that somehow could be used and compared and merged and combined with the scientific data that they were going to produce. In a sense, we wanted, as a final output of the project, to publish what we call a decision-making utility tool. There is a set of online tools to enable community members, policymakers, stakeholders to understand the impact of climate change and how people use their water and how they can improve their use of water to have a better, to reduce, the kind of stress on our environment. And so the challenge was internal, first of all, within our team, to try and understand how we could somehow dismantle this kind of lack of trust that was mutual. And then, of course, how we could identify ways in which we could understand each other in a way that was facilitating a discussion at the same level. And I'm sharing here the audio of one of the conversations I had with Mike Wilson. Mike is the dean of our school, the School of the Arts, English and Drama at Loughborough University, and is also one of the major experts on storytelling. Traditional storytelling, he was a professional storyteller before becoming an academic. And is the reason why I decided to move to the UK, because he's such a brilliant academic.
How we might, through the work of bringing together narrative and science, start to dismantle the hierarchical system of different kinds of knowledges that places certain types of knowledge at a higher status than other types of knowledge. And one of the problems with that hierarchical system is that it divides the participants in these interactions very clearly into knowledge producers, so those would be the academics, the researchers, knowledge implementers, And by that, we might think of policymakers and agencies, government agencies, those kinds of actors in the system, and knowledge consumers, which are the public or the businesses who are affected by these water decisions. And it very clearly divides people into those kinds of categories. So one of the things we're trying to dismantle is not only the hierarchy of knowledge, but actually to blur the boundaries between those particular roles, so that people who are perhaps perceived of as knowledge consumers are also seen as knowledge producers and knowledge implementers themselves, and vice versa.
So after this conversation, what happened?
How would Mike?
Yeah, he likes to repeat things when I don't understand. After this conversation, what happened is that we struggled to believe that just running digital storytelling workshops was enough to blur those boundaries and to facilitate those kind of conversations. So we didn't want to run a digital storytelling workshop with the farmer and then one with the policymaker. So we had to invent a new form. So what we did, we applied for additional funding, and we had like a pot of 60,000 pounds, and we had the opportunity then to explore new forms. So something that wasn't attached to the original grant, so that we could have more freedom to experiment with different techniques. And so what we did, I'm Italian, as you can guess, I think, and we found in some archives, and also we've been in touch with another project, major project on climate change led by the Stockholm Environment Institute, and part of this project was the University of Sassari, which is in Sardinia. It's a beautiful island in our sea. And we discovered that in Sardinia, until the late 70s, they were used to apply a traditional form of conflict resolution. And that consisted in gathering the local communities in the small village, usually in front of the church, and sharing ideas and exploring dilemmas, so contested stories, and asking the elder people of the community to take a judgment, and involving the whole community as a jury to then have conversations and take a decision that was beneficial for the future of the community. So the additional reason why we wanted to explore a sort of tool like this is because usually when we work with digital stories or any kind of traditional form of storytelling, we tend to gather and share stories about the past. In this case, as we wanted to merge scientific data, and our hydrologists in the team, they were developing their models for the future impacts of climate change in 50 or 80 years' time. We wanted to give them something that was a projection for the future, coming from our local stakeholders, from the community. And so we found in this process also a response to our first challenge, that was how personal stories can be meaningful for the whole community. Because what we discovered by gathering stories and working on future stories is that when we gather stories from the past, we usually tend to know a lot of details, and we usually tend to attach those memories at a personal level. When we project ourselves to the future, we tend to somehow facilitate a more communal view of the future, because we somehow recognize that there is a legacy as a projection to the future. And in a way, this was informing our method as well, so that by working on future stories, we could somehow develop a tool that was more oriented to the community cohesion. And so we trialed this in a rural area of England called Fenland, that is in East Anglia, that is the driest region in UK. And we trialed this Sardinian form that in Sardinia is called La Ragione and means the reasons, okay? And we tried then to make it as a sort of performative event, a sort of forum for public storytelling, in which people were coming to share their stories, explore dilemmas, and asking for a feedback to the whole community to then find a way forward. And I will play this video just to give you an idea what kind of event it was. Consider that this was a 4-hour event, and we did it twice, one in a rural museum and one in an urban, quite nice contemporary art gallery, just to also to understand how different environments somehow can have a different impact on the interaction within the room.
What we will be doing is we will be listening to evidence. We will be listening to stories. We have here the plaintiffs, who are the accused, not strictly speaking witnesses. These are our storytellers. Each of them is a stakeholder who will be telling their own tales of water, of drought, of flood.
I have a really strange relationship with water. I love it, hate it. I love it when I'm drilling and the rain comes, love it. When I'm trying to harvest it and the rain's still coming, don't like it.
Water links us to the past, defines the present, and calls to us from the future, promising a vast new landscape, a living landscape.
Coming back to the mere measured about 6 miles long by 3 miles wide. It was one of the largest areas of natural water lakeland in England. See how big it was.
Water is essential for all life. We need water to drink, for sanitation, for the environment, for industry, and to grow our food. And water for food production really is a big deal locally here in the Fens.
Migrating waves of humans to replace archaic populations, and during the beginning of the subsequent Holocene epoch, East Anglia becomes severed, detached from the continent, as sea levels rise, the shallow basin of the Fens is born.
So we need to encourage the heal back, and we need to do all that we can. My job, a big part of my job, is to do that, working with landowners, water users, and just encourage the Fens to be good for fishes, but mainly for eels.
Good choice of venue, Dave, that's all predicted. Before they go home, that's sea level. The pump switch off, quite simply, that's sea level. 1 to 2% of our farm is above that level.
So it is an evolving picture, and it will evolve long after my time, and my children's time, and my children's children's time. Because as long as there are people living in the Fens, and the Fens are vibrant places, and the economies are vibrant, there will be, well, it's going to love commissioners. That's my story. We hold these lands in trust for the future. And so, to God, adieu.
So you saw there was food involved, not only because it was an Italian traditional form, but anyway, there was part there was part of the process of the original form as well. So it was like, let's share everything. So let's spend time together and let's have informal conversation. And one of the beautiful things we discovered in this process, replicating the process, was actually that this level of informality facilitated conversation. I guess you've seen people dressing in different styles. So you saw the policymakers dressing in their nice kind of, clothes and posh things, and the farmers having a different kind of approach. At the beginning, they were all separated, but then after the first slot of stories, they've been starting communicating, and then the food facilitated the process. I think the beer too, anyway. But another thing that you may have noticed is the presence of a musician. And this is in addition to the original form. So we tried to explore throughout this process if songwriting could be part of the storytelling performance. So what we did, we've been working with a local folk singer. Actually, she's American, but now she's living in Sheffield in UK, and trying to combine the individual stories into a song that at the end of the performance was sung by all of us. And then we asked the local people to join us and record. While Sharon was recording in a professional studio, they were recording the chorus with us so that we could join all the voices together. And they gave us all the images to then make a video for the song as well. The second video I'm going to share now is actually the song that came out from this performative event. So what happened, we've been working in preparation of the performance with the storytellers, and at the same time, I was recording the stories and working with the singer to shape the lyrics of the song. She came to the event, and while we were all enjoying the food, she was somehow redefining the lyrics, because of course the stories were slightly different because they received the feedback from the audience. So she tried to capture also the feedback from the audience and the final jury, let's say, talk that they gave at the end of the performance. And the video I'm going to share now is not the actual video of the song, but it's a video in which we tried to combine together some snippets of the voice recordings or the prep work we did before the performance with the lyrics, so that you can understand and listen the transition between the individual story and the actual lyrics of the song.
I'm ex-Royal Air Force. I'm a photographic technician. Something I noticed in 1976, the rivers Nene, Ouse and Welland were still flowing on the original courses. That was interesting because from aerial photography, at the right time, in drought, all the water courses stand out.
If you fly alone over the fence, a strange sight comes into view. A checkerboard of fields, green and brown, and channels of water blue.
74 was the pre-registration for cows. And one of the group had a new cow, so they made that much money. The first year they made a lot of money, weren't it? Yeah. 75, and everybody had a cow with a pig on, and they said, "Pig with potatoes."
All we actually are is lookers after of it.
The fields you see are fertile and rich. They yield fine crops of potatoes and grain. The peaty earth was once submerged, but the wetlands we did brave. We pushed back the sea, brought in the plough. We claimed these drowned lands for our own. The rivers we diverted, ditches we cut, but the land is only long.
Sort of the tail end of 600 years of history. Obviously, the fens were drained in 1600, so there's a lot of history and evolution over that. So we're constantly monitoring water levels, and we are telling people when they can take water and when they can't, when they need to ease back in moving water from the river, so it's River the Nene, bringing it into our system, and then sharing out, so the abstractors can put water on their land and grow their crops. So we're getting down to -4 metres below sea level south of Peterborough, so we really are pushing water up.
The silvery Nene was straightened and tamed, its water running into drain and mean. As windmill sails pumped the water up, then engines plied by its field. Now there are rules and regulations, sluices and logs to show the water where to go. It's measured and directed
largest lake in England?
Its fisheries and wildlife were renowned for providing food. The Mere was also used for recreation, including sailing and winter ice skating. In addition to fish and wildlife, there was abundant green growing. Its superior quality made very good thatch.
One thing I've noticed, far over at Fletcherbury, I've been there now about 1990 I moved there. The wind has changed direction. It seems to have moved direction more.
When here were wetlands, rivers and lakes, the fens were home to fish and fowl. There was fishing and healing, skating on the mere, recreation and a living for all. Now all of the land is put to good use, and the fenland harvests provide for us all. There are changes in the wind, and the rich black soil erodes. Our plants need an overhaul.
Fen Blow, I don't know whether you've come across this one. The drainage has caused the soil in some cases is, I don't know, it's turning into sand on droughts. The wind picks it up. It's only just down the road here. I've been in it. But what this means is that the drying out of the fens, got to be very interested in what they're going to watch. They're going to reflood it as part of the Liguori-From project. We're very interested in watching how the Great Fen is going to change things. There's a lot of anti-ness. All this good farming land is being wasted. It's not really. So they don't do anything about it. This will be a desert.
How will we preserve the fen and all its creatures? How will we grow enough food for everyone? What must we do to find common ground between fenland, farm and town? With the wetlands shrunk, many species lost, and human population continuing to grow, there are problems to solve, many things to learn. What the future holds, who can know? But just as our ancestors shaped the land, carved channels out, made the water flow uphill, the uphill struggles that we face can be overcome if we ever will. And the river is a snake winding through the land, and straight are these channels we've dug by hand. The river is alive, flowing as it will, but we control these channels, make the water flow uphill. The river is a snake winding through the land, and straight are these channels we've dug by hand. The river is alive, flowing as it will, but we control these channels, make the water flow uphill.
So, more than the output itself, we were interested in the process and how the research process has been somehow adapted and has been reshaped by the interaction that the researchers had with our stakeholders. So something that was written in a way became something completely different just to engage the stakeholders and the community members throughout the whole process. So I'm going to close the presentation with just a few reflections on how in this project in particular, and in the other research project we are working on at the moment, we are reshaping the traditional and conventional digital storytelling method to find new ways to empathize with the local communities and facilitate a more, how can I say, democratize the access to knowledge and the access and the sharing of the knowledge. And as Mike was saying, trying to not only dismantle the knowledge hierarchies, but try to think that as a researcher, I'm not the only knowledge producer. But if I produce knowledge, it's because I'm interacting with the other people, and will be not my knowledge, will be our knowledge produced together. So these are just a few images of some examples we have from some work we did in Nairobi in Eastern Africa, applying storyboarding techniques. This is an exercise of participatory tagging we did, and this is a pasta making workshop. So random things, but effective, and things that have been developed by talking to the people we wanted to work with since the beginning. So this is the co-design of the research process. So where we've been trying to define the methodology while having these interactions with the community members. To give you the example of the pasta making, we were trying to engage a self-sufficiency group in Cambridge, and they invited me to give a talk, and then they said, we don't give talk, we have to share our knowledge. And our aim is to share knowledge that make people aware about how we can build a world that is more sustainable for everybody. So I had no scientific knowledge to share. I said, okay, what I know is how to make pasta. No? And my concern is that while I'm making pasta every day, if I am with my husband, is a certain amount of water. If we are inviting our, family, is another certain amount of water. So we waste a lot of water, actually. So we use the pasta making as a way of reflecting about the amount of water that we waste every day in our, traditional way of preparing food, for instance. So just to give you an example of how, of course, it's been a bit tough to justify the expenses to my university because we had to buy a pasta making machine. Yeah, and these kind of things. But has been a very effective and powerful tool, because then by building an environment that was totally informal, they felt there was a good place for them to start sharing stories around their daily way of using water or consuming water or saving water. These are other examples, again, to co-design the process together with our stakeholders and to somehow enable the stakeholders to participate and somehow feel that sense of ownership on the final outputs of a project. And in particular, this is some work we did with the BBC in Leicester, and this is a very interesting project we ran with some asylum seekers and refugees in Nottingham, where we invited them to co-design with us an exhibition. So the original idea in that case as well, because our department has the expectation that we always produce digital stories, they said, okay, we will do a great screening of all the stories with the refugees, without thinking that they didn't want to share their pictures, they didn't want to record their voice, they didn't want sometimes to, overexpose themselves. So the idea we had was, again, with them to co-design an exhibition in which we could somehow experiment with different techniques, storytelling techniques. I've got examples of this, but I think we are running out of time. If there is more time, I will share this with you again. And these are other examples again. You'll see here the work we did with the folk singer, and this is another technique that we are actually going to experiment tomorrow in our workshop, that is the storyboarding exercise, in which especially it is quite a practical approach to storytelling, especially if we don't have so much time to work with our community members, because producing digital stories takes time. And some people are not available for a variety of reasons. So one more thing that there is a provocation for our friend Joe is about how to make accessible this tool. That was the original message of the digital storytelling. So making accessible something, facilitate the access to a tool to then give people a voice, an opportunity to share their stories. But the more we are using it, and the less accessible it's becoming, because the more we build a structure that is a 5-day workshop or a 3-day workshop or a snapshot storytelling full-day workshop, in a way we are excluding some people to participate. You saw in the song the pictures of the people sitting all around with me, and they were all farmers. They are very busy people. They cannot come for a workshop for a day. You can go to their farm, but they are busy, and every day there are variables. The weather changes, especially in England, so often. So we had to find a way for them to have access to this tool. So we couldn't exclude them because they couldn't, it's not only about the digital component, it's about the time commitment and all the other issues that when we explore different tools for sharing stories can arise somehow. And the last pictures is, you will see Philippa here, is a part of the project we ran together during my fellowship at the Smithsonian. And again, this was another experiment, another ways of including our stakeholders, our final audience, our target group in shaping the methodology. So before starting the actual research project, we invited some groups. We joined actually a group that was meeting every week at the National Portrait Gallery to see an exhibition, have discussions. There were all people coming from all over the world to practice their English. So we thought, okay, let's go there, let's spend a couple of hours with them, and let's trial a quick storyboarding exercise with them to see how we can readapt this to combine the use of museum objects to trigger storytelling processes. And then we explored this further with Philippa during my time here. And then something that is quite important, especially in Britain now, we are mad for ranking. We like to be monitored, and we want to be the best ones. So my university has been named the best university of the UK last year, and now we have the new coming REF exercise. This is the Research Excellence Framework, and new criteria are coming. One of these around the social impact of our research. Storytelling is becoming quite popular in our campus, even if it's a very, let's say, STEM-driven campus. But now they like us a bit more because this social impact is something that can measure better with our work than with the STEM people's work. So they are now giving us some funding to implement a digital storytelling lab in Nairobi. So that is linked to our current research funding on air pollution and waste management. And I'm closing my presentation here, just sharing with you a short video we made with our friends in Nairobi. This group is called Hope Raisers, and it's a group of artists. And they just built a community center for young people to learn how to do some art, painting, or they have a nice sound studio. They go there, they play music. And they asked us to support them to develop this digital storytelling lab. And we thought that was a good opportunity for us, of course, to measure and enhance the impact of our research, and for them to shape the sustainability of the research project since the beginning, to inform, let's say, the impact of our research project since the beginning. And this is just a synthesis so you can have an idea of the kind of environment they are living in and the kind of work we hope to do with them.
Largest slum in Nairobi. It's a square kilometer of land, just 1 square kilometer of land, and it's inhabited by about 100,000 people.
That's all.
Thank you.
And now we can.
Time for questions and discussions.
Now it's the nice part.
Thank you for your talk, and thank you for coming all the way over here.
Thank you.
I guess one of the things for me that I think about is sort of there being space for like so many narratives at once, you know? And sort of this thing of like, or when you center the local and center like individuals in the communal, but like at a local small scale, like grassroots level. It just seems to me like if I'm like ExxonMobil or something, then a narrative of like you, the individual person, is like not using water well seems like very appealing, you know? Or if I'm like the World Bank, then like narratives of like, oh, this disenfranchised town has like a art project now seems like very appealing, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there is like a space for a more like systemic side of this project too, or if that's just like not this thing's job, which it like certainly doesn't have to be.
No, there is. So the majority of the stories are personal stories, individual stories, and actually the challenge is now, and we wanted to produce a database of stories or micro-narratives, because sometimes, for instance, working with the farmers, sometimes we had snippets or anecdotes or, you know, like short memories. So, and we built this database, and we are now working to extract data from those stories. So we are developing tools to make these stories accessible, because again, when you have like 500 micro-narratives, like short films, and then you want to put this online, and then you want to make somehow, you want to give access to each of those, or to at least to have the opportunity to explore those stories, even the smallest one, even the less relevant apparently, but the most effective in terms of, you know, personal truth and how each personal truth can drive each personal behaviors. So the challenge in that case is how we categorize those stories and how we make them accessible. And the effort now for us is to what kind of tools we can use then. And the stage we are at now is working with some, you know, on some softwares to extract from the transcriptions from all these stories some meaningful information that can facilitate the access to these personal individual narratives. But we also thought that sometimes we had to make, let's say, condensed narrative that give access to multiple voices in just one shot, because it's very, very difficult. We are all, so it's very difficult for people to take their time to explore, you know? It's very difficult to listen, and it's very difficult to engage with something that other people are talking about. We said, of course, there are good stories easily shareable, but there are less easy to be listened, but as well as relevant as the other ones that we want to appear, and we want to give those stories visibility. So the challenge when we do this kind of work is then make them accessible in a way that is effective, as you were describing, but also it's very hard to define what is a good story and why a good story is good for a reason and then could be good for another reason. So if we want to have an impact on policymakers, so maybe there are some stories who can be more effective. In the reasons, we had a guy coming from the National Farmers Union, that of course he had a more convincing way charming way of delivering his story. But then we had one of the farmers who at the end, he composed a short poem. So he really grasped the meaning of using the arts as a way of sharing knowledge. And he wanted to share at the end of the performance a short poem. For me, that short poem can be even more meaningful than the official kind of charming story delivered by the policymaker or whatever. So yes, you are right, but there are implications and challenges of working with personal narratives. And one of these is linked to the language, for instance. So when you publish stories online, of course we use transcriptions to search the stories, but we also use tagging. And how do you tag the stories? Who is tagging? Who is deciding which are the tags? So One tool that we are developing now is for participatory tagging. So you saw one of the pictures when we had all the tags in the room to invite the stakeholders to then choose the word they wanted to pick to describe and extract meaning from a story. And they were able also to add new tags. It was just a mess because we talk about things in such different ways that it's very hard to then deliver something that is actually easily accessible. So again, for the digital humanities people, this is an interesting stage of our research because working to develop these kind of tools and also understanding, another thing we are doing now is developing a tool to understand where the words appear in a narrative and how many times they appear. And at which point, if the point in which those words are appearing are somehow culminating also in a narrative. If that word is coming out just at that time, but is in a moment in which the narrative takes a different shape, a different form, then how to measure the different value of the words. Is it about numbers, so how many times the word appears, or is it about where the word appears in a short narrative, which is quite a tricky and interesting angle as well to analyze the stories. And also words networks. So which storytellers, like farmers, are using a network of words which are somehow linked to a sort of family, and different words that maybe can be part of different family, and how to connect those families, even if they are somehow linked to the same meaning. But again, it's around making the stories accessible.
This is really great. I'm super interested in how bridging expert and lay knowledges. If you could talk a little bit more about that, or is there resistance from experts, or how does that work?
Yeah.
I would assume that people are resistant to having their.
So we did a nice exercise. So, for instance, within our team, because that was the most challenging environment, and it wasn't, So consider this is a team of 30 academics coming from different universities or research centers or governmental bodies, and the majority of the scientists were all men, and and the arts and humanities people, just Mike and myself, and then other colleagues. The exercise we did was working on the language. And we used as a starting point a word that is, we wanted to work on a word that was present across all the disciplines. And we wanted to use the word scenario. That, of course, for Mike, who is a theater guy, is a thing. For an hydrologist, scenario modeling is another thing. And then we had crops experts, human geographers. And so what we did, I've been filming our team members, giving me the definition of scenario. And then we combined the film together to understand what we were talking about. So our first reflection was on language, because the first obstacle was how to understand each other. Even if we were using the same word, we were meaning different things. We were absolutely talking about different things. So, and from that, then we thought, okay, by the way, why don't you think that storytelling is a language? So we thought storytelling is a good place to use the same language, because we all tell stories in the same way. So we started developing this idea that storytelling is the language with the grammar that we all know, even with different, let's say, background information that we may have, different types of knowledge. We all know how to express ourselves in a story, and we all tend to use a story a story structure in a very similar way. And so we tried storytelling within our team. And in the work we are doing now in Colombia, one of the two projects that is around, again, the water use in an area that is not far from Bogota, we are doing storytelling work with the scientists who are going to measure the kind of water and measuring, the species and the natural scientists. So we found in storytelling our place to dismantle this kind of knowledge hierarchies and to facilitate the conversations between expert and lay people. And the tool we use, the conflict resolution tool, we had around the same table on the stage, actually, we had people from the government, we had people from, the farmers community, people from local community historical groups, historical society, environmental groups. So, and they all felt while we were doing the preparation work, that was easier for them to find the ways of interacting with each other if they were all telling stories. Because if they had to present like a presentation on their work, they would have used a different language. In particular, the guy from the Environment Agency talking about the yields. Of course, he's a scientific guy, let's say a natural scientist. But as he had to tell a story, he was expressing something that was more emotional and personal. So the prompt we gave them is how to look at what we know through a personal angle, facilitating a way that could, using a language that could facilitate empathy with the audience. So to somehow enable and activate this circle between the storytelling and the story listening. So there could be an opportunity for everybody to give feedback. Because sometimes, when we do the storyboarding exercise, sometimes in the dry project I invite hydrologists to come and use the scientific data to trigger the scenario storyboarding, so that the participants, members of the communities, will talk with the hydrologist. This guy will try to explain the graphs and all the data he's trying to develop in his hydrological models to inform the storytelling process. But inviting him as well to make a story. That is an example of what could happen. So to make these information more accessible in a way that we are all sharing, that is the language of storytelling.
I'm curious about the conflict resolution part, because it makes me so anxious. And I love the idea, but I keep thinking there's going to be a lot of conflict and not so much resolution. And I was curious also at how you frame, there's two sides of the story, I guess, two stories, yeah. Two groups of stories. And you frame it sort of antagonistically, so that they're somehow really presenting opposite perspectives. And then you have the community members sitting as a jury, and they're trying to decide one is right or the other is right?
Yes, so what's happening is that we identify dilemmas. Mm-hmm. Once we had identified those dilemmas...
So for the Fens, it's what are we going to do about drought? Or what's,
So well, in that specific area, the dilemma is that there is a project, a long-term project to build a new wetland. Right. To have the wildlife...
Flood the fields.
To reflood the fields. So that was a wetland that has been drained over the past centuries. And of course, it's a great land for farmers, because if you see the land is very dark, it's very rich. So it's perfect for farmers. It's the area where all the potatoes for England are produced. So it's such a great part, for vegetables and everything. So it's intensive farming. But what happened that while they were draining this land, the land is shrunk. So that now you see like the railway is like 3 meters high, and the rest of the land is just lower. So to avoid, and of course there are problems with buildings, and so there are houses that are starting, like going this way. So there are actual problems, but the farmers community has a strong voice. And we all tend to empathize with the farmers, because they produce our food and they're struggling because they have pressures with from the supermarket, all these kind of dynamics. On the other side, we have the environmental associations and local groups who are supporting this project to reflood the area. because they want to somehow shift from an agricultural kind of economy to a more touristic economy. So to re-wet, build a national park, have tourists come in and make fisheries and things like that. So the problem was, so are we going to re-wet this area, or are we happy to keep growing the food for the UK in here? Consider that this happened over Brexit referendum, where there is this crazy idea that they can be self-sufficient. So this was the dilemma that by talking with people, we wanted to somehow address. So then what we did, we identified 5 stories from each side that could be somehow representative. But by doing that, we also understood that stories are fluid. So actually the conflict itself is somehow less hard than if you just talk about the issue, because each of them has had a different story. So just bringing people around, telling their own stories from different sides was a way of reconciliating, somehow reconcile their views about an issue. That was already an interesting process. Then what we did, we had the only professional person was the person you saw at the end closing the speech, you know, that was the judge. So he's a performer, he's a professor of theater history, a friend of ours, and we invited him as a, you know, just to facilitate these kind of conversations. The community, we had an audience of 70 people, and they selected a group of 10 of them who had the power to talk to the judge to make decisions. So while we were all having dinner, you know, we were having dinner together, there was a table reserved for these 10 members of the community and the judge to discuss the different points coming out from the 5 and 5 stories. And then trying to combine the 2 of them, at the end, they delivered a sort of jury verdict. That is not in this film. We had other films of that, and of course was very, very, very interesting, and somehow combined the need for the future. Because of course some of the stories are about the past and the present, but the aim of the jury was to deliver something that was good for the future. So, and it's quite an interesting tool. So we applied it twice, and then we somehow presented it at the Utopia Fair. That is a big fair they organize in London for the 500th anniversary of the Utopia of Thomas More's Utopia. And actually it was the day after the Brexit referendum. And this had an incredible impact. So, and somehow this is becoming maybe a tool that we are going to reuse with the Smithsonian as well. Maybe, yeah. To reflect on climate change.
All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
I have a question that's, I guess, more tailored to the work that goes in before you start the projects on the ground. Kind of like, how do you make decisions about, you know, this is a project that will work out, or this is a project that I think has potential? Like, what are some of the variables that you see that kind of help you make a decision about, you know, which project to take on and how fruitful it would be?
Yeah, so there are 2 important factors. Of course, one, this is why I shared the video at the end. So the main factor is understand the needs of the target audience. So the way we usually work is identifying the people we want to work with, or they identify us sometimes, and then understanding the needs. And then, of course, seeing what is available in terms of funding and trying to combine, you know, the priorities of a grant application with the needs of the target group we want to work with. For instance, this around waste management was something they wanted to do. So they wanted to work with us, and they wanted to develop a digital storytelling lab, because in Eastern Africa, even in those slums that you just saw, they all have access to digital mobile technologies. And that is the way they use to communicate and share ideas and express their creativity. And they found very, very powerful this tool of digital storytelling as a way of expressing their anger for the world they are living in at the moment and trying to make that visible and their voice heard at different levels. So they just wanted the tool, okay? And then we knew that there were current funding for global challenges, what they call in England. So this kind of broad environmental issues in developing countries. And this was our way in to then start developing the project with them.
So are your participants kind of like convenience sample? Like, don't the scientists want you to be very formal in how you at least get the people to come and tell stories?
Yeah, that's the difficult part. Yeah, this is why the pasta making, for instance. So sometimes you have to create the opportunity because people sometimes don't believe that is a useful tool. Of course, the scientists are very, very formal, but we need to make them think that they are human beings as we are, and we all need to and we all need to listen to each other because this world is not going in the right direction. So the idea of living in a silos is not working. So we push people to understand how to prioritize dialogue as something that is absolutely necessary at this stage, because whatever we do in our life, we really need to engage and participate. So I heard, for instance, to give you an example, the recent elections they had in Italy, where there is a mess now at political level, they had only the 14% of people going to vote, which is no longer democracy. So Jesse, you were asking about conflicts. I was reading an article or a book, I can't remember, before coming. I think I told you that I was reading that. That was around the importance of antagonism in democracy, which was quite an interesting thing to read. Because at this time, you know, there are extremes, but the antagonism in a very, I would say, in an ancient Greek way of thinking about agonism and antagonism, in a, you know, in the literal way of etymological way of thinking about antagonism is not happening anymore, because there is no participation. So what I think is very, very important is to understand that whatever we do needs to be driven by emotions. Because if we don't work with emotions, we are not changing anything. We are not changing behaviors, we are not acting, we are not participating. So my way of approaching storytelling is just to use it as a tool to support people to hear and listen to their inner kind of emotions. And even when there is something that looks opposite, like, you know, lay knowledge, scientific knowledge, that is not opposite. There is something in between that can happen and will happen if we activate this kind of conversations. But of course, formality is, again, a huge obstacle. And formality is a barrier to emotions as well. You cannot see emotions crossing that kind of limit. So, again, it's about understanding how to empathize with people and finding a way in that is human-driven rather than driven by other kind of values. So that can be, because if we think about, you know, knowledge or cultural diversity, you know, we can find a lot of barriers for communication. It's so easy. So the nice part is challenging ourselves and trying to merge these kind of extremes and building a dialogue among the two, rather than, it would be too easy just to stuck in a corner with our friends who think in the same way. So the idea of the conflict resolution is, let's understand that there is a dilemma. Let's recognize that. Let's recognize that I don't understand anything about what you say about hydrological modeling. But try to listen to what I'm saying about what I think is important to me. One of the things we heard about when we were collecting stories is that people don't trust scientists sometimes because they believe that there are economical interests behind their research and that they are sponsored by big companies who are somehow driving the kind of research funding. So because they are supporting them, they are sponsoring them, so maybe the research funding are not so reliable because there is an interest that is hidden and we don't know. Instead, people trust other people's stories because they believe they are true, or they are believed as true, even if they are not factual, But those stories and memories or projections into the future are somehow driving our behaviors because we believe they are true. So the truth is not in the data, the truth is what we experience. And maybe storytelling is a good way of sharing the way we experience the world and somehow reconnect our way of knowing the world through this idea of sharing what we perceive.
I think we have one question back here, Sarah, and then I would love you to show that video that you didn't show. So maybe we'll wrap up with that, if you could do that.
Yeah, if I have internet.
To compliment the song with the archival images, it was beautiful with the contemporary images in the archives.
Thank you.
But maybe, building on both of your questions, the logistics of it, how long are you in the field doing this work? And what goes into identifying the different people?
Yeah.
And who stays at home, who doesn't show up? I guess. I deal with that a lot.
So the time we spent, let me see, I've got internet, yeah. And then we close with this other video. Okay, so your first question was how much time, how long, yeah. So for that specific conflict resolution project, we worked for 10 months. Not intensively, but was, it takes time to build that kind of connections at local level. But once you start, having those connections, it's very easy to make people participate. And I think there is a broad and general interest in spending time together and finding space and places to share ideas. So sometimes we think that participation is not happening because people don't like to participate. But I guess the participation is not happening because people are not given the space and place to be heard. So this is a good thing to start approaching this kind of methodology. So that was a 10-month project, considering that we had to organize 2 different performances and the final event in London. This major project on drought has been is the 4th year. So it's quite a long project, but we are working 7 different river catchments and across 7 different sectors. So like agriculture, business, community, horticulture, built environment, tourism. So we need to somehow identify people for each of those sectors, which takes time anyway. Of course, it's a big team, but... And the second question was around...
Well, like in the room when they're presenting, they're having their stories, who stays at home? Like, who isn't coming to the events? Like, how do you, is there, people ask about the resistance within, but are there people did you have community members that didn't want to participate? Was it hard to get them there? So
we've been very self-critical because we saw the kind of typology of people who were participating, and it wasn't a very diverse group of people. This is why then we try to improve this aspect in the urban experiment. So in the rural area, it was very hard to have younger people to come in because they perceive the rural museum as a not fancy activity. So if I had to do that again, I would have started in the schools, actually. But there is an issue with working with schools, as you know, if you start a project and the academic year is already started, it's almost impossible to engage them. And if you are not in the curriculum, then you can struggle to find a theme that can be good for the teachers. So, but of course, diversity is something we've been lacking in the first one. So because we've been working a lot with local community groups, the majority of them were over 60, 70. People who had more time to spend, and they wanted to have their time, you know, nicely organized. I'm playing the last word.
I would
video.
love you to play that, and we have some food outside that we can continue our conversation.
Yeah, whatever you want. So this video here is just to give you an idea of the process of another project we did. You know, I told you about co-developing the exhibition with the asylum seekers. Okay, so this is a short video of 6-7 minutes to document the day. We could film and take pictures only on half of the group, because in the other half there were people who were struggling with their documents, so they didn't want to be somehow photographed. But this idea is to tell you that when we started the project, we thought, okay, we have to make digital stories in a day with this group of people, but then during the day we made something completely different. So the exhibition was made by the storyboards that you will see, but then they've been able to develop a short song, just a short song. There was a way for them to represent some ideas that came from their stories.
Do we forward each other and go behind the memories?
Remembering, because my parents are doctors who used to work a lot and used to travel, and I used to live with grandma, so she used to sing a lot of songs that my mom sings, so she can comfort me and, you know, as if my mom was there.
Yeah, from that day we start to move between countries every 2 years or every 3 years, because we couldn't find like good job or good place to stay.
And sort of at the end of it, it's about resolution and peace and singing and dancing, being happy and feeling that sense of belonging.
I've been here about 3 years now, and all my friends are in Greece, and it's a little bit hard, like, they're far away and you can't find the right person to have a friend, making new friends. So I tried all of my feelings and everything to interpret it in my work. So I finally designed a dress, which I call it Infinity Freedom. I have two birds, which they holding that infinity sign, and they will never gonna reach each other. For the same art and science fashion, I create mosaic, which I tried to link my background and where I live now, in Nottingham. Yeah, I've got the picture. I tried to take from each part of Nottingham and to try to make it one piece of mosaic.
I'm just concerned that I wouldn't be able to fit in the society I'm in, because I came from a very different culture, and when I came here, everything was different. You have to be able to be flexible to accept other views and stuff. Isolation, this is something that I'm scared of. You find yourself isolated.
For instance, in my country, if I go to somewhere new, you're new here, you just set up your furniture, looking corporate art, okay, so you don't have time to cook, you bring you food, say, well, okay, we'll probably invite you for the next night and all that. But now we're living in Sherwood area, over a year home now, and I don't even know who's the next door. And the way I'm living, I would say that if I live for another 10 years, I wouldn't really know which years or which years. What did you do? But my country is entirely different. People are more socialized. for this more welcoming and
I was about 12 countries come here. It takes with me about 4 or 5 months. I stay in Cali 3 months and this, and every day trying to come to here. And after that, when I came here, I can speak English. I feel myself lonely.
كنت صغيرة بلعب بالتراب ماما لبستني الجزمة والشراب تجري أكتب عربي كانت I remember my mom, she is singing that, come on, to your mom, baby, is sweet. And she called me always, my little baby.
ماشي مسيتي فلا ظريفة كان باغيش ما يجيز كان واش نجرى. She was like, I love you all my beautiful flowers. Without you, my love is nothing. My love is
So small, all alone is sad. If we come together, then we'll all feel glad. Many different cultures, many different ways. We can form a mosaic, each will find our place. Each of us is different, infinite and free. But we can sit together and find harmony. With a little patience, we'll learn each other's souls. With a little kindness, we'll get along.
So the tune you heard, we discovered that was a common tune in all the culture of the people who were around the table, which was fascinating. So we actually discovered that they had something in common, even if they were using different words, there was this small tune. And then the idea of the mosaic came from one of the participants, and we thought it was a nice metaphor to explore the meaning of social inclusion of all of us around that table. And in the meantime, they've been making those objects for the exhibition, and then the exhibition was put together with a lot of mosaic, kind of tiles, yeah, all over the walls, and the song was playing in the room where the exhibit was. So that was the end.